Hi, everybody, and thanks to the organizers for giving me a chance to speak today. My name is Sacha Sokoloski, and today, let me try this. There. Today I will be talking about latent variable models. So there are at least two reasons why we put latent variables in our models. First, so that we can decode compact, interpretable representations of potentially difficult to interpret high-dimensional data. The second reason is to parsimoniously introduce additional parameters into our model and thereby increase its representational power. So we can split the world of latent variable models into two groups. Those for which Bayesian inference and maximum likelihood learning are analytically tractable. This includes things like mixture models, which I'm depicting here, as well as probabilistic PCA and factor analysis. And if you squint, it also includes the family of normative models of neural circuits known as linear probabilistic population codes. Now, when the data gets sufficiently complex, we need more complex models like latent diffusions, and then we can no longer do inference and learning analytically, and we need to use approximation schemes like variational methods. But this naturally raises the question, what is the largest class of LVMs that afford exact inference and learning? So that's the question that I want to try to answer, and in order to do that, I make two assumptions. First, I look at I restrict myself to a very large class of exponential family latent variable model, which I don't have time to define here, but suffice it to say, it includes all of the models that I previously listed in the analytically tractable category. Second, I'm going to focus on those models for which the prior is conjugate to the posterior. That's just a fancy way of saying that they both have the same exponential family form. It's also true for all the models that we previously considered. Now, you can show that these LVMs have conjugate distributions if and only if they satisfy a constraint on their natural parameters. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you that constraint. I'm just going to list some of the properties that it gives you. So, these particular models that satisfy this constraint, unsurprisingly, you get closed-form inference. You've basically built that in by design. But when you further analyze these models, you find that you can derive a direct maximum likelihood training algorithm, so you don't need to use elbow. You can evaluate the densities of the model, you can actually directly evaluate model performance and the log likelihood. You get exact sampling, so you don't need Gibbs sampling in order to get samples from the model. And this is perhaps the most interesting thing, you can take these constrained LVMs and compose them into hierarchical graphical models that retain these tractable properties. So let's look at an example of that here, where we combine a normative model with a statistical model to try to do some synthetic neural manifold learning. So we're going to start with a probabilistic population code. So this is a collection of Poisson neurons with 2D Gaussian tuning curves that uniformly tile some stimulus/latent space. And I'm depicting that with the red dots in the upper panel. Now, if you visualize this in your mind, you might be able to see that if you move around the main area of this stimulus space, the sum of the tuning curves is going to be approximately constant. And that turns out to be a special case of this constraint that I mentioned earlier, which means within this bounded region, we can actually do more or less exact Bayesian inference. So now I want to turn this into a learning problem, and so what I'm going to do is I generate a latent sample. So now we have two noisy concentric circles. And to generate training data, I'm going to pass those through the population code. So, excuse me. To generate a bunch of spike observations, and you see 3 examples of those on the bottom. So now I want to train a hierarchical model to recover a distribution over that the latent sample, and by extension, the neural manifold in the high-dimensional spike count space. And suffice it to say, because I've told you I can do this more or less in closed form. If I take an LVM which satisfies these constraints, I can maximize its likelihood, I can visualize the maximization of the likelihood, I can, just like back in university, I can just watch the negative log likelihood go down. And then if you look at the model in latent space that you recover, it does, I think, a good job of representing that synthetic sample that we saw earlier. Now, a natural question at this point is, of course, what LVM did you use there? And the easy thing to say would be, it's basically a mixture of Gaussians over the latent space. But what it actually is something a bit more interesting, which is a Gaussian Boltzmann distribution, which is kind of like a mixture of Gaussians, except multiple components can be on at the same time, and they can be correlated with each other. And all of this, again, stays in the realm of analytically tractable models. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Future work, I'm trying to figure out more models that satisfy these constraints. I would like to actually combine this. I don't see this as competitive with variational methods, but rather might allow me to build more larger, might allow me to push the limits of VAEs, whatever. I'd like to further develop this probabilistic approach to neural manifold learning. And then, yeah, I guess just want to highlight that I think this direction of research sort of points us at what I think is a pretty interesting normative question, which is, does the brain rely on approximate inference or constrained models? Thanks for your attention.